Hello, everyone. What a heartbreaking thing to be with you all this morning. And thank you for showing up here today to honor the life and send off the soul of the person that some of you knew as Joe, many of us knew as Yosi. I want to acknowledge not only the people in the room, but I believe there are people watching on YouTube live right now from Boston, from Philadelphia, from Tampa, from many places that Yosi and his spirit touched in his too short life. We're going to open our funeral service with singing the traditional Psalm 23. If you know it, I invite you to sing along with me. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, Bino deshe yarbitzeni, Amei menuchot yenachaleni. Nafshi eshovev, Nafshi eshovev, Yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo, gam ki Begeit Samavet Lo irara Ki ata imadi Shivtecha umishantecha Shivtecha umishantecha Hema yenachamoni Taroch lefanai shulchan Taroch lefanai shulchan Lefanai shulchan neged sorerai Dishanta vashemen roshi Dishanta vashemen roshi Dishanta vashemen roshi kosi revaya achto vachesed yirdefoni kol yemei chayai Veshavti beveit Adonai Veshavti beveit Adonai Leorech Yamim. And since it's for Yosi, let's nigun a little. Yadadai, 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 have to think he is so happy to hear all of you singing so strongly. That's his happy place, right? A group of people singing a nigun together. As we send him off, we're going to hear from a few people who knew and loved him in different facets of who he was. So I want to invite first Mike Aronson, with whom Yosi worked for decades at Lucidine, now Microtech, to come up and share his memories of Joe.
So, yeah, my name is Mike Aronson, and most of you know him as Yosi, but to us, he was Joe. Joe and I worked together at Lucidine Technologies for 28 years before I retired. Now, all of us spend a significant portion of our waking hours with coworkers, implementing shared goals, surviving professional storms, and sharing the sweet sunshine of success. If you're lucky, and this relationship starts with mutual respect and shared commitment, this turns into a lasting friendship. I was lucky. I was employed as a physics instructor at a community college in Oregon City when I drove down to Corvallis to take an interview in the summer of 1990. It was the strangest interview I've ever participated in. The top three managers took me around the office, explained their products, introduced me to everyone, talked about their hobbies. Absolutely no technical questions. And this lasted for 2 hours. I told my wife I'd be back in 90 minutes. Then Joe says, "Let's all go to lunch." At the restaurant, Joe sat next to me and talked to me about his work experience, his educational experience. He had entered college at 16. And finally it hit me. The interview was to see how well we could work together. Joe wasn't looking to hire another computer programmer. For Joe, the workplace was more than just a physical space where we earned our livelihood. For him, it was a network of interactions and connections that turns coworkers into family. So instead of hiring me for the job I applied for, I became Joe's assistant. My arrival coincided with the beginning of a 25-year dream project to manufacture a fully automatic lumber grading system. Of course, we didn't know it would take us 25 years. After my third week on the job, Joe assigned me to write the first optimizer program. It was a great show of confidence, and I appreciate it. To get things done fast required us to work both days and nights. Joe and I worked together on December 25th in an otherwise empty building. Joe knew that he was Jewish, but he was somewhat ambivalent about that. My wife and I invited Joe to Shabbat dinners on Friday nights, and he enjoyed the ritual. Little changes over time became large differences. First, he attended Friday night services, then Saturday morning services. Then he started wearing a kippah at work. He asked my wife to make his talit, so I was not surprised when he talked to me. He said he was conflicted about choosing rabbinical school or cantorial school. And 5 years ago, Susan and I proudly held one pole of Joe and Emily's kippah. Here are words from some of Joe's colleagues. Mark Hyatt says, "Joe was a spiritual man and through his openness helped me understand my own faith. I was blessed to have Joe in my life, and I'm better for having known him and for our conversations." Here's another one. Joe was always fond of the Mark Twain quote, "If only I had some more time, I would have written a shorter letter." I promise you I won't give you any of Joe's puns in this speech. Dan Robin told me that this embodied Joe's approach to engineering, always making time to find a more elegant solution. The many conversations on software, both practical and theoretical, will be greatly missed. Chris Mossbrucker says, "Joe was a curious and joyful soul whose presence always brought light into the room. No matter what kind of day you were having, a visit from Joe or a simple conversation with him always left your day better. Chris says he's going to miss Joe's true curiosity and his love for not only finding the solution, but embracing the journey to that solution. He had a way of making even the most complex challenges seem manageable, and his approach to life inspired those around him. His spirit, wisdom, and laughter will remain with us always, and we are better for having known him. Joe's legacy of kindness and thoughtful exploration will continue to guide and inspire us every day. Patrick Freeman told me his first project at Lucidine was extending and maintaining a large code base with which Joe was the biggest contributor. Everyone knew this. Joe loved learning, and he loved sharing what he'd learned. And Patrick was still learning from Joe 32 years later, right up till that tragic day last week. In the hour before this tragedy, Joe had delivered a highly technical presentation to the programming staff. Instead of diving right into dry details, Joe first addressed the crowd and quizzed us on software best practices. Joe was ensuring from the start that the meeting would be interactive rather than one-sided. And the presentation was a journey through Joe's very latest code and applied the latest technologies. Joe was clearly enjoying himself, both for the shared love and knowledge in the room and for teaching moments it afforded. The resulting conversations promoted learning from each other. The constants in his professional life were an unending curiosity and a fearlessness to take on new technical challenges. The personality constants were a gentle and kind disposition, always courteous, always respectful, always ready to listen to a problem, and always ready to offer assistance. Patrick says 32 years was not enough. I'll miss you, Joe. And this from his admiring friend, George Carmen. Soon after Joe showed up in Corvallis in 1988, he became an important person in my life, both professional and personal. He was smart as a whip, and also kind and caring, radiating warmth for all. Beyond our shared interest in technology and growing Lucidine into the thriving company that it became, we shared so many interests and ideas in art, in books, in learning about ourselves, in being better citizens of the world. We worked together daily, growing the company and growing ourselves. He was essential to my life and so many others. A dear, dear man, a wonderful presence on the earth. Ofer Heyman says, everyone who worked with Joe was touched and impressed. I can't do an Israeli accent, I'm sorry. Our colleagues in Italy expressed that to me during my recent visit there, and again when they heard the sad news. He has always been a North Star in many ways, providing invaluable insights and feedback. Ellen Nelson knew and worked with Joe for nearly 40 years. She will always remember him as extraordinarily kind. His exceptional brilliance was beautifully balanced by his humble and thoughtful and gracious nature to everyone he encountered. As for me, Joe was my guide to becoming a better programmer and a manager. And I miss him. We're all going to miss Joe. You know, it's not just the empty chair that leaves a gap in our lives. It's about the missing laughs in the lunchroom, the absent voice in the meetings, the unfulfilled plans, the shared dreams that now seem distant without him. Well, it's okay to grieve. While Joe is no longer with us, he lives on in our memories, and we have each other to lean on. We can find comfort in that. Thank you for coming today to celebrate the life of an extraordinary person who was a true friend, a mentor, and an inspiration for us all.
Our second speaker knew Yosi in a very different capacity. Rabbi Yitz is going to share some brief recollections and then lead us in Treasure Each Day. Now, the TBI members here really know how to sing that song, but please raise your hand if you're not a regular at TBI and would like the lyrics to be able to sing along. Anybody? You know Yosi would want you to, so if you don't know the song, raise your hand.
Thank you, Mike, for giving a glimpse into a world that I never got to see Yosi nor Joe, and it sounds like it was an amazing part of his life and the lives of all of you working together. I want to ask Yosi forgiveness before I say anything, because the truth is I always felt that I saw something very exquisite in what he revealed in his presence in our community. And I always felt that what he revealed was a small part of the depth that he carried. I've known Yosi for many years through our shared participation in Jewish renewal. Yosi was a regular participant for decades in the Jewish renewal Kala gatherings, the national gatherings, as well as the Ohala, the professional organization for Jewish renewal chazanim and rabbis and rabbinic pastors. For most of those years, I only knew Yosi as a distant, ever-present participant in these gatherings. I only really began to know Yosi in a more connected way when he moved next door to me in Eugene. It's then that I really started to have an appreciation for the depth of knowledge, for his hunger for learning, for how much he carried in terms of the richness of the musical tradition that he knew so well. I couldn't start a nigun without him knowing it already. I couldn't, everything. He just seemed to carry volumes of knowledge about sometimes quite obscure facets of the tradition. Yosi's regular attendance at TBI here gave me and our community many opportunities to experience his beautiful voice and his wonderful Torah chanting, along with the commentaries that he would glean from Rebbes like the Slonomer Rebbe, which he studied to the end of his life and was his companion in the sefer that he had on the kitchen table and everywhere else that he could grab a minute to take another scoop of learning from a great Rebbe. The most profound sharing with Yosi was in the context of preparing for the wedding of Yosi with his beloved Emily. It was there that I experienced his deeply loving nature, his sensitivity, his caring, his desire to be a good husband. As we prepared that celebration of love and sacredness of a relationship, I couldn't help but be falling in love with both of them together for the beauty that they were sharing. And many of you were there at the chuppah when the whole world got lifted up by the joy and the beauty of two people in love and commitment. I've never met a person who wasn't unique. And yet, Yosi was unique to an outstanding degree. I think that his way in the world was mystical to a degree that few experience. I always felt that when we were davening together, we'd be in prayer services. And Yosi would be moving around the sanctuary, gently humming sometimes, sometimes softly dancing, always moving, gesturing to the words to point out the meaning of some depth in a line that could easily be just scanned over the surface, but Yosi didn't go on the surface. He was always looking to the depth. When he would chant Torah, it was remarkable what he would bring forth with his wonderful translations as he chanted and the commentaries that would flow from him and open up windows of insight for us as he beautifully chanted. He was a master of chanting Torah. He was a real Dovener, giving himself into the words and the depth of meaning that opened him and were open to him. This was part of his legacy as a chazan in the lineage of Jewish renewal. What was unusual, perhaps, in a congregation outside of a renewal conference was quite typical. He spoke the language of a whole strand of Jewish people who were exploring the renewal of Judaism by going to the roots, the depth, and drawing it forward to renew our tradition, our ancient tradition, which he loved so dearly. I enjoyed seeing how gently he shared his knowledge of Torah and religious practice with Emily, and how she grew with those gifts, taking on learning Torah herself. He was gifting her with a lot of the love that he had for our tradition and wanted to share that love and gave it. I also believe that while he was translating the tradition for Emily, I have a hunch he was benefiting from Emily translating the world to him. I loved Yosi and was inspired by the holiness that I felt him experiencing. He inspired me. He made me slow down a little bit and pay attention to another level. His humble nature seemed so unabashed in the presence of Hashem. He seemed so open to expressing who he was before God. He was a true chassid, someone who flowed with love. His love, I hope that there are many that are watching on the YouTube from the renewal community that he was so deeply involved in, and who knew Yosi's nature so well in these different places that were mentioned already. His world was big. Perhaps we only saw little pieces of it, each of us, but he lived in a big world, and he filled it with beauty and holiness. And may we all delight in the love, the appreciation we have for such a holy neshama, such a great soul. And Zichrono Livracha, may be blessed to always be remembered for a blessing. May you rest in peace. Oh, yes. let's join together, with Yosi's sudden elevation from this world. It is important for us to remember how precious each day is, to never assume another, and to have our eyes open to gratitude for what we have in our lives. So let's join together in singing Treasure Each Day. Limnot Yameinu, Limnot Yameinu, Limnot Yameinu, Kein Hoda V'Navi Levav Chochma. Limnot Yameinu, Kein Hoda V'Navi Levav Chochma. Teach us to treasure each day. Teach us to treasure each day, that we may open our hearts to your wisdom. Oh, teach us to treasure each day, that we may open our hearts to your wisdom. Oh, teach us to treasure each day. Treasure each day. Teach us to treasure each day. Treasure each day. Teach us to treasure each day. V'navi, v'navi levav chochma, levav chochma, v'navi levav chochma. Treasure each day. Teach us to treasure each day. Treasure each day. Teach us to treasure each day.
As it was said, Yosi was very, very humble and very, very kind and very generous. And I hardly ever heard him say anything bad about anybody. At first I wondered about this, and I wondered how he got there. Was he born that way? But no, he actually developed that. And so I'd like, as a way of us to honor, all of us to honor Yosi, to place him in our hearts and to take on the practice of being non-judgmental of others. I need that practice too. And I hope as a community we can all do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I like the idea of putting his picture up next to my workstation with the WWYD. What would Yosi do? What would Yosi say? So, it does, listening to people, it does feel like reminiscent of the parable of the blindfolded people trying to describe what an elephant is based on the part of it that they're touching. And I hope to be able to describe the elephant such as he was from the words of many that I've heard from and spoken to, and from his own words as well. Many of us here at the Temple Beth Israel that is in Eugene, I know you're here too, TBI Waltham, we knew Yosi Weintraub as this smiling, sometimes ecstatic, really ethereal presence, almost floating around the sanctuary, loving his davening so much that sometimes just English would extemporaneously flow out of the liturgy as he was saying it, because there was an insight that he had just received that had to come out. And, some of you knew Joseph or Joe or Yussel, apparently. This man of many names lived many passions in his too short life that was interrupted so suddenly. Joseph Weintraub was born in Tampa, Florida, as the only son of an only son of an only son. His mother, Dolores, worked in real estate. His father was a scrap metal dealer who was loving but temperamental, a little paranoid, very overprotective. Friends were not allowed to come over to the house, and Joe was not allowed to ride a bicycle in case he would get hurt. When he was a teenager, Joe bought his first bicycle and stored it hidden so that his father wouldn't know about it. As a very young boy, Joseph spent his days with his paternal grandmother, Jessie, who played mathematical card games with him and taught him to read before he was 5 years old. By the time he started elementary school, Joe was identifiably bright, so much so that he skipped high school entirely and began taking college courses after finishing 9th grade, actually tutoring the fellow student who drove him to class. He majored in mathematics and graduated from the University of South Florida at age 19 in 1972. And as we know, as we're getting the picture, as much as Joe was this totally brilliant nerd, he also had a musical side and this very spiritual side. In addition to the math games, he was encouraged to sing by both his grandmothers. Grandma Jessie would take him to movies once a month and encourage him to sing on the bus rides downtown cheered on by the other passengers. And as he recollected in his bio for his cantorial ordination, which is on his website, Grandma Peggy, Zichrona Livracha, had been the synagogue's choir director long before I was born. Her voice still came through so sweet and strong that being beside her davening and singing became my soul's thread of Jewish connection for nearly 3 decades. The family went to conservative synagogue every Friday night for years, and Joe enjoyed it so much that he went on his own on Shabbat mornings and completed his bar mitzvah there, leading most of the service. But he drifted away from Judaism for a while after his father had a falling out with the rabbi when Joe was a teenager. He taught himself to play guitar around that time, and he would play at local coffee houses. After college, he also studied pottery and macrame, and he sold his work at local markets. He simultaneously worked as a freelance software developer and consultant in the early 1980s before continuing to his master's degree in electrical engineering, which he completed in 1987. This was, as Rabbi had said, a more uniquely unique person than many. He did not stick to one track. He pursued his passions wherever they took him, intellectual, artistic, relational. He very much wanted to find a life partner, and he was willing to follow love quite literally Though he didn't marry until he met Emily, he grew and benefited from other rich relationships throughout his life. His first girlfriend taught him to talk about his emotions, which had never been encouraged at home. And it was another girlfriend who led him across the country in the late 1980s, where they did a summer stint as a park ranger. He was in the Grand Tetons along the way, and they landed in Yachats, Oregon. It was there that he encountered and began to work for Lucidine Technologies in Corvallis as a software engineer, a position that he held sometimes remotely, sometimes part-time, but always very diligently until his death. While living in Corvallis, in that iteration, Joe began reconnecting with his Judaism, partially through a Christian girlfriend who brought him to her church, which had both wonderful gospel music and a Hebrew class. And then when Joe was 40, he went to Mike's daughter's bat mitzvah, which he credited with really rekindling his interest in Judaism. He was so moved, he decided to explore synagogue Judaism again. He began learning trope from Lyle Rockler of blessed memory, the Cantor in Corvallis, and he also commuted to Eugene for Friday evening services with Rabbi Yitz and holidays with Rabbi Hanan. It was thanks to a different girlfriend whom he met at the Aleph Kala in Corvallis that Joe relocated to the East Coast in the early 2000s. He moved to Boston and became involved with TBI in Waltham, first as a congregant and then as a lay leader. He began taking courses with Rabbi Art Green at Hebrew College then, and that's probably around when he began going by Yosi, just based on who's referring to him as Joe and who's referring to him as Yosi. Many members of TBI Waltham are watching us and have sent such beautiful messages of love and appreciation of Yosi. For more than a decade, Yosi was mentored by the cantor and spiritual leader of TBI Waltham, Morris Hollander of blessed memory, who viewed Yosi as the son he never had. As Mark Freidenberg, a former president of TBI Waltham, recollects, when he went into a nursing home, Morris gave Yosi his tefillin to take care of them for a while. Yosi was with him throughout his last moments, and for years he would carry on Morris's tradition of picking willows from a tree on the banks of the Charles River for Hoshana Rabbah. In 2007, Yosi began official cantorial studies with Chazan Jack Kessler of blessed memory with the Aleph Cantorial program based in Philadelphia. He became a frequent lay leader at Pnei Or and Germantown Jewish Center and did student internships and high holiday gigs all over the Northeast, New Jersey, New York, Rutland, Vermont. He made trips to Israel and studied in Ulpan. All of this while continuing to work remotely with occasional trips west for Lucidine. Likely his most satisfying cantorial role, however, was the several years after his ordination that he got to spend back in Waltham as the official chazan of that TBI. And as Rabbi David Finkelstein, who worked there with Yosi, wrote yesterday, quote, "His presence was indispensable. Talking, singing, and davening with him were a very deep pleasure and honor of my life. Perhaps my favorite teaching was his practice of walking over and touching the walls of the synagogue when he sang Tivnei Chomot Yerushalayim, build the walls of Jerusalem, in the opening of the Shabbat morning Torah service. I remember Yosi allowing his neshama to move his body in many ways, to touch walls, to dance, to hug people. His soul was sensitive and deeply compassionate." End quote. Yosi came back to Oregon in 2017 to do some in-person work, he thought for a few months. But at a service at TBI here in Eugene, he noticed Emily leading a group of children in the song One Day, and he was intrigued. He approached her after a Shabbat Alive service, and they started going on walks together. After several of these such walks, one day he mentioned to Emily that he'd be returning to the East Coast soon. And she asked, "Oh, when are you coming back?" And Yosi, who had until that moment figured that he was returning to the East Coast indefinitely until Lucidine called him back next, looked at her and said, "Oh, maybe next month?" Your love was so beautiful, so uplifting to all of us. And Yosi learned so much from you, and you from him. I remember running into the two of you outside in the neighborhood on a walk, and the two of you admitting that you couldn't talk right then because you were working out a fight. You taught each other how to be in relationship, how to be better in relationship. Yosi could be so very patient, but once angered, it could take him days to simmer down. And you, Emily, could be easily irritated, but very easily mollified. Pirkei Avot 5:11 teaches that there are different temperaments. One who is quick to anger and quick to be appeased, it says their gain is canceled by their loss. One who is slow to anger and slow to be appeased, it says their loss is canceled by their gain. One who is slow to anger but quick to forgive, that one is a chassid. Emily, you and Yosi taught each other to be chassidim. You uplifted each other. You made each other more you, but also softer versions of yourselves. It was such a gift to all of us that your relationship brought him back to Oregon to make his home here in Eugene and at this TBI. Ruth recollects that moving here during the pandemic, Yosi was one of the first people she met in person, running into him on one of his Spencer Butte hikes while she was on a family hike. And they had an absorbing conversation, between Yosi and her 5-year-old daughter about trees and soil all the way down the mountain. His full-on attention was always a gift like that. At the young age of 71, Yosi went so without warning. It's a shocking blow that his mighty heart fell so suddenly, that such a sweet soul should be gone so quickly. The void is large. The void is large, but you do not face it alone. He will be missed terribly, not only by Emily, but by all of us who were uplifted by his presence. Even with all that feels unfinished in all of the layers of soul work, from the very physical to the very ethereal, the work on your house, the class on liturgy that he had agreed to teach but hadn't been scheduled yet, all the relational work still undone. There is nothing for it but for all of us to take up his work, not only to support Emily in the coming days and months and years, but for all of us to bring our kavanah to our prayers, to bring intention to our relationships, to be attentive and curious and wondrous with each other. I want to close with a teaching in Yosi's own words from his website. He wrote, "It has often been said that the most fundamental of all prayers is simply to take in a breath and on exhaling, just to say, 'Thank you.' So if you consider the sound of out-breath as song, then our in-breath, which is none other than the divine out-breath, is God's song itself. We ourselves are the new song, renewed in every moment." Yosi, thank you. Let's take that breath together and say thank you. Thank you. In a moment, Rabbi Yitz is going to step back to the Amud, to the podium again, and lead us in El Malei Rachamim, the traditional prayer for the repose of the dead. And then those who are able are welcome to join us walking over to Masonic Cemetery, or driving if you need to, a few blocks away for the burial, which is scheduled for noon. It has been rainy, and the graveside is on a hill, so take care of yourself and no pressure if you can't manage the steep mud. And then there will be Shiva Minyanim and opportunities to informally share recollections of Yosi here at TBI on Thursday and Saturday evenings at 7 p.m. Oh, sorry, thank you. I'll take that correction. 7 p.m. on Thursday evening, 6:30 p.m. on Saturday evening. 6:30 p.m. on Saturday evening. Is there anything else you'd like me to announce? Okay. So please stand if you're able as Rabbi Yitz leads us in El Malei Rachamim, and then whether you join us at the burial or have to be on your way at this point, thank you for being here, and go in peace.
Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina B'malot Kedoshim U'Tahorim Kizohar Harakiya Mazhirim Et Nishmat Yosef Hirsch Ben Pinchas Yitzchak Vedina Miriam Shehalach Liolamo Ana Baal Harachamim Hastirehu Beseiter Kinafecha Liolamim Utzeror Bitzeror Achayim et Nishmato Adonai hu nachlato V'yanuach b'shalom Al mishkavo V'nomar Amen. God, filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens' heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekhinah, amid the ranks of the holy and the pure, illuminating like the brilliance of the skies the soul of Yosef Hirsch, the son of Pinchas Yitzchak and Dina Miriam, who has gone to his eternal place of rest. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter him beneath your wings eternally, and bind his soul among the living, that he may rest in peace. Let us say, Amen.
Thank you. Those of us who are continuing to the burial will make our way to Masonic now.